Hi everyone, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. We got a new story to tell, so let's start. It started like any other day. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the bedroom window, a sound I usually found peaceful, but this morning it felt distant. The light filtered through the sheer curtains Olivia picked out years ago, casting soft patterns on the walls. I stretched and turned over, half expecting her to still be lying next to me, but the other side of the bed was empty. She was always up early, bustling around the kitchen, or sneaking in a run before the kids woke up. It was one of the things I admired about her, how she seemed to find time for everything. But lately, it felt like all that energy was spent everywhere but here with me. I followed the smell of coffee downstairs, the hardwood cool beneath my bare feet. Olivia was at the counter, her back to me, her long dark hair pulled into a loose bun. She was wearing one of those oversized sweaters she loved, the kind that hung off one shoulder, giving her an effortless, casual elegance. "Morning," I said, grabbing a mug and pouring myself a cup. "Morning," she replied, but her voice sounded off, too light, too deliberate. I glanced at her as I took a sip, noticing the way her shoulders seemed tense, the way she avoided meeting my eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated for just a moment before turning to face me. "David," she said, her voice softer now, almost trembling. "Can we talk for a minute?" That was when the first knot tightened in my chest. The words "we need to talk" have a weight to them, don't they? It doesn't matter how casually someone says it. Those words signal something heavy, something you're not ready to hear. "Sure," I said, setting my mug down on the counter. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, like it was the only thing holding her up. "I've been seeing someone else." The room went silent. At first, the words didn't register. It was like she'd spoken them in another language, something my brain refused to process. "Seeing someone?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does that mean, Olivia?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, and she let out a shaky breath. "It means I've been having an affair. For a while now." My stomach churned. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. "Who?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign to me, hoarse, shaky. "His name is Marcus," she said quietly, as if saying it softer would make it less painful. "He's someone from work." Of course, I thought. Marcus. The name alone sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I remembered him from her office holiday parties, the younger guy with the cocky grin, the one who laughed too hard at her jokes. I'd brushed off the pangs of jealousy back then, telling myself I was being paranoid. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt the final shred of hope slip away. "2 years," she said finally. 2 years. I staggered back, the weight of her confession hitting me like a truck. 2 years of lying, of sneaking around, of building a life with someone else while I was here. Holding everything together, believing we were a team. "Why?" I croaked, the word barely escaping my lips. She looked up at me then, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I can't do this anymore, David. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to move on." "Move on?" My voice cracked. "We have a life, Olivia. A family. Kids who look up to us, who trust us. What about them? What about us?" Her tears spilled over, but she didn't answer. That silence, that horrible, suffocating silence, told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just confessing. She was leaving. I took a step back, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. The memories flashed through my mind like a cruel slideshow. Our wedding day, the birth of our kids, late nights spent laughing over glasses of wine in this very kitchen. It all felt like a cruel joke now. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. Outside, the September breeze was sharp and unforgiving. I leaned against the porch railing, staring blankly at the quiet street. A neighbor jogged by with his dog, waving at me like it was just another day. But it wasn't. Inside, my mind was spinning, replaying her words over and over. 2 years. Marcus. Move on. I thought about all the times she'd said she was working late, All the weekend conferences she'd insisted were mandatory. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen the cracks forming beneath the surface? The worst part was, I couldn't even feel angry yet. Just empty. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the distance. All I knew was that when I finally turned back toward the house, nothing about it felt like home anymore. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know how to move forward. When I walked back inside, the house felt different. It wasn't just the absence of Olivia's voice or the lingering tension in the air. It was something deeper, a stillness that pressed down on me like a weight. For 20 years, this house had been a sanctuary, a place where laughter and life echoed through the walls. Now it felt hollow. Olivia was still in the kitchen, standing by the counter. She looked up when I came in, her face pale and drawn. For a second, I thought she might say something, but she just stood there, staring at me with those tear-filled eyes that I used to find so beautiful. "David," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I brushed past her and headed upstairs, the familiar creak of the steps under my weight feeling somehow foreign. When I reached our bedroom, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, staring into the room that now seemed like a stranger's. The bed was neatly made. Olivia's doing, always her doing. On her nightstand was a stack of books she'd been working through, their spines cracked and pages dog-eared. The sight of them, so ordinary and yet so intimate, made my chest tighten. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. My thoughts raced, a storm of questions and accusations. How long had she been planning this? Did she ever feel guilty? Had she thought about me, or the kids, when she was with him? 2 years. The words echoed in my head, over and over, like a cruel mantra. For 2 years, she'd been living a double life, smiling at me across the dinner table while stealing moments with another man. How had I been so blind? The photo on her nightstand caught my eye. It was from our anniversary trip 3 years ago, a weekend getaway to the coast. The kids had stayed with my sister, and Olivia and I had spent 3 days walking the beaches and watching the waves crash against the rocks. In the photo, her head was on my shoulder, her smile radiant. Looking at it now, I couldn't tell if it was real or just another piece of the lie. Hours passed in a blur. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke to the sound of the front door closing. My heart leapt for a moment, thinking it might be her, but then I remembered. I got up and went to the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. Her car was gone, and the driveway was empty. A strange mix of relief and heartbreak washed over me. I turned back to the room, my gaze falling on her closet. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a row of neatly hung blouses and dresses. For a moment, I considered going through her things, looking for some kind of clue, something to explain why she'd done this. But I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. Instead, I went back downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I found myself in the living room, staring blankly at the shelves of family photos. That we were frozen in time, Olivia and I on our wedding day, her veil blowing in the breeze as we laughed at something the photographer had said. The kids as toddlers covered in paint during one of our ill-fated art days. A family camping trip, all of us grinning despite the rain that had soaked through our gear. Each photo felt like a stab to the heart. These moments weren't just memories. They were the foundation of our life together. And now, it felt like they'd been built on sand. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, before my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I reached for it, half hoping it was a message from Olivia saying she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to come home and fix this. It wasn't. "I'll be staying with Marcus tonight. I think it's best if we give each other some space." The words hit me like a physical blow. Space. That's what she thought this was about? As if some distance could mend the chasm she'd created. I set the phone down, resisting the urge to hurl it across the room. Anger bubbled up inside me, but it was hollow, swallowed quickly by the overwhelming ache in my chest. I poured myself a drink. The good whiskey, the one I only brought out on special occasions. As I stared at the amber liquid swirling in the glass, I tried to make sense of it all. How had we gotten here? What had I missed? The memories came rushing back unbidden. The nights she'd worked late, claiming she had deadlines to meet. The time she'd seemed distracted during dinner, her phone buzzing with messages she'd dismiss with a quick, "It's just work." The weekend she'd spent out with her friends, leaving me to hold down the fort with the kids. At the time, I'd brushed off the unease, telling myself I was overthinking it. But now it was impossible to ignore the truth. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight streaming through the blinds doing little to chase away the heaviness in my chest. The house was still quiet, the kids still asleep upstairs. I brewed a pot of coffee, the routine feeling strange without Olivia bustling around the kitchen, humming under her breath. As I sat at the table, staring into my mug, I thought about the day ahead. How was I supposed to pretend everything was normal when nothing would ever be normal again? Footsteps on the stairs broke my train of thought. Ella appeared in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep. She mumbled a morning and headed straight for the fridge, grabbing the milk for her cereal. "Morning, kiddo," I said, my voice sounding more even than I felt. She sat across from me, munching on her cereal as she scrolled through her phone. For a moment, it felt almost normal like any other morning. Then she looked up. "Where's Mom?" I froze, my heart clenching. "She left early this morning," I said carefully. Ella frowned, but didn't press further. I could see the questions brewing behind her eyes, but for now, she let it go. I knew it was only a matter of time before the kids noticed her absence, before they started asking the questions I wasn't ready to answer. And when that time came, I'd have to find a way to explain what had happened without breaking apart in front of them. But for now, all I could do was take it one moment at a time. The truth was I didn't know what came next. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent 2 decades building, was gone. And in its place was a hollow, aching void that I didn't know how to fill. The days that followed Olivia's confession blurred together. I went through the motions, waking up, making breakfast for the kids, and pretending everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was standing in the ruins of a life I no longer recognized. Olivia hadn't come back. She hadn't even tried. Every morning, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting her to walk in with that familiar smile, her keys jingling as she tossed them on the counter. But the door stayed closed, and the house felt emptier with each passing day. I knew she was with Marcus. She didn't say it outright, but she didn't have to. The messages she sent were curt and clinical, mostly about logistics. "Can you make sure Ella takes her math book to school? Don't forget Caleb has soccer practice on Thursday." It was as if we'd become nothing more than co-managers of the same household. The love, the partnership we once had was gone, replaced by cold efficiency. One afternoon, a week after she'd left, I found myself sitting in my car outside her office building. I don't know what I was expecting to see. Maybe her and Marcus walking out together, laughing like nothing was wrong. Or maybe I just needed to confirm it was real, that she wasn't coming back. But as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, I realized how pathetic I must look. A grown man, stalking his wife's workplace like some desperate fool. I drove away, the knot in my stomach tightening. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in one hand and my phone in the other. I stared at the screen, at Olivia's name in my contacts, my thumb hovering over the call button. I wanted to call her. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. But instead, I opened my banking app. If she was serious about leaving, if she'd really decided to move on with Marcus, then I needed to protect myself. Protect the kids. I started by moving half the money from our joint account into a separate one under my name. It wasn't petty. It was practical. I'd seen too many stories of men blindsided by divorce, left scrambling to piece their lives back together. Next, I went to the safe in the hallway closet. Inside were our important documents, birth certificates, passports, the deed to the house. And tucked in the back was something I hadn't looked at in years, our prenuptial agreement. I remember the day we signed it. Olivia had laughed, calling it unromantic but practical. "We'll never need this," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with confidence. Now, as I read through the crisp pages, I felt a bitter sort of satisfaction. The business was mine. The house was mine. Everything we'd built together would stay intact, even if our marriage didn't. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Sitting across from her in the sleek downtown office, I laid out everything. Olivia's affair, her decision to leave, the kids. She nodded, taking notes. "It's good that you've already taken steps to secure your assets," she said. "That prenuptial agreement will make things much easier for you." Easier. The word felt strange in the context of a divorce. Nothing about this felt easy. "What about custody?" I asked. "Typically, the courts favor joint custody," she replied. "But given the circumstances, we could argue for primary custody, especially if Olivia's actions have disrupted the stability of the household." Stability. Another word that felt alien now. I left the office with a folder of paperwork and a growing sense of resolve. For the first time since Olivia's confession, I felt like I had a plan. That evening, as I sat in the living room helping Caleb with his history homework, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was Olivia. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up, keeping my voice steady. "What is it?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "David, I need to talk to you." The softness in her voice made my stomach churn. "Talk," I said, keeping my tone cold. "Not over the phone," she replied. "Can we meet? Tomorrow?" I considered her request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell her she'd forfeited the right to talk when she walked out that door. But another part of me, the part still searching for closure, said yes. The next day, we met at a coffee shop near the edge of town. It was one of those cozy, rustic places with mismatched furniture and soft jazz playing in the background. I arrived first, choosing a table near the window. When Olivia walked in, my chest tightened. She looked the same, soft curls framing her face, a light sweater hugging her frame. But there was something different in her eyes. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sitting down across from me. I didn't respond, just waited for her to speak. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater, her gaze darting around the room. "David, I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I want to be honest with you." I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. Honesty would have been nice 2 years ago. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering where she was and what I'd done wrong. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "Marcus, he's not what I thought he was. And I realize now that I hurt you. I hurt all of us, and I'm sorry." I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. Was this genuine remorse? Or was she just trying to crawl back because things hadn't worked out with Marcus? "What do you want, Olivia?" I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "I want to come home," she whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. Her walking through the front door, the kids running to hug her, things going back to the way they were. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the night she spent with someone else while I was here, holding our family together. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. "David, please." "No," I repeated, my voice firm. "You made your choice, Olivia. Now you have to live with it." She stared at me, stunned, as I stood up and grabbed my coat. "Take care of yourself," I said, and then I walked out the door. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I thought that saying no to Olivia, drawing that hard line, would give me some kind of peace. And maybe in the moment it did. But as the days turned into weeks, a different reality began to settle in. A strange blend of relief, anger, and a grief I couldn't quite shake. Olivia didn't call again after our meeting at the coffee shop. She didn't text or try to explain further. For a while I thought that was it. She'd made her play, and I'd shut it down. But then came the whispers. It started at Caleb's soccer game. The crisp autumn air carried the shouts of kids and the sound of cleats tearing across the field. I stood on the sidelines with the other parents, clapping and cheering whenever our team scored. It felt normal, almost comforting, until I heard my name. "David." I turned to see Sarah, one of Olivia's friends, standing a few feet away. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should have approached me. "Sarah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I wanted to say I'm sorry about everything. I had no idea Olivia was going through all that. She didn't tell me anything until after. Her words trailed off, and I clenched my jaw. Until after she left, I finished for her. Sarah nodded, her expression full of pity. She's been staying at a motel, you know. She doesn't talk much, but she's not doing well. I didn't know how to respond to that. What was I supposed to say? That I felt bad for her? That I should swoop in and save her from the consequences of her own choices? Instead, I shrugged. She made her bed, Sarah. It's not my job to fix it. Sarah bit her lip, looking like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. After a moment, she gave me a small nod and walked away. The encounter left me feeling raw, my emotions tangled in a way I couldn't untangle. I didn't want to care where Olivia was or how she was doing, but part of me, some stubborn, stupid parts, still did. The next sign of her unraveling came a week later. I was in the middle of a meeting at work, reviewing plans for an upcoming project, when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, but when it buzzed again, I glanced down. Olivia, I need to talk to you. Please. I sighed, shoving the phone back into my pocket. Whatever she wanted, it could wait. I wasn't going to drop everything for her. Not anymore. But when I got home that evening, she was waiting for me. Her car was parked in the driveway, and she was sitting on the front steps, bundled in a coat against the cold. The sight of her there, looking small and fragile, sent a pang through my chest. I parked the car and got out, keeping my expression neutral. What are you doing here? She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. David, I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I had to come. I didn't know how else to. You're not supposed to be here, I said, cutting her off. The kids are inside, and they don't need this right now. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. I just need 5 minutes, she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, glancing at the house. The lights were on in the living room, and I could see Ella's silhouette through the window. I didn't want to do this here, but something in Olivia's voice made me relent. 5 minutes, I said, stepping onto the porch. That's it. She nodded, her hands twisting nervously. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies. For hurting you, for... Stop, I said, holding up a hand. If this is just another apology, I don't want to hear it. I told you, Olivia. You made your choice. I know, she said quickly. But I made the wrong one. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. You don't get to say that now, I said finally, my voice low. You don't get to walk back into my life and act like you didn't destroy it. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm lost, David. Marcus doesn't want me. The kids won't talk to me. I don't have anywhere else to go. I stared at her, my heart pounding. This wasn't the strong, confident woman I'd known for 20 years. This was someone broken, someone who had gambled everything and lost. But that didn't make it my problem. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said quietly. You chose him, Olivia. You left, and now you have to live with that. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. Please, she said, her voice barely audible. I just want to come home. The word home felt like a slap in the face. This house, our house, wasn't her home anymore. It hadn't been since the moment she walked out that door. No, I said firmly. You can't come back. Not now. Not ever. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. David, please. But I didn't let her finish. You should go, I said, stepping back. Before the kids see you. She opened her mouth to argue, but then she seemed to think better of it. With a shaky nod, she turned and walked to her car. I watched as she drove away, the taillights disappearing into the night. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of her absence. I didn't feel the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. Instead, I felt something else. Freedom. It's strange how quickly silence can turn from suffocating to comforting. In those first few days after Olivia left, the quiet of the house felt unbearable, a constant reminder of the chaos she'd left behind. But now, weeks later, I found myself drawn to it. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Ella kept herself busy with school and friends, and Caleb threw himself into soccer. I didn't push them to talk about their mother, but I noticed the way Ella's jaw tightened when Olivia's name came up, and how Caleb avoided asking questions altogether. I tried to be everything they needed: the steady hand, the strong shoulder, the one who made sure life kept moving forward. It wasn't easy, but every day I got a little better at it. One morning, I woke up early, long before the sun rose. The house was still, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I felt the urge to go for a run, a habit I'd let slide in the chaos of everything. I pulled on my sneakers and stepped outside, the crisp autumn air biting at my skin. The streets of Millhaven were quiet, the sky tinged with the faintest hint of dawn. I started off slow, my legs stiff and uncooperative, but as I found my rhythm, something shifted. With every step, the tension in my chest eased. The pounding of my feet on the pavement drowned out the noise in my head, the doubts, the anger, the lingering pain. By the time I made it back home, sweat dripping from my face, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't a miracle cure. The ache in my chest was still there, but for the first time, it felt manageable, like something I could live with instead of something that controlled me. Later that day, Ella knocked on my office door. "Hey, Dad," she said, leaning against the frame. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweatshirt. "I was thinking, maybe we could go out for dinner tonight? Just us and Caleb?" I looked up from my desk, surprised. "Yeah, of course. Any special occasion?" She shrugged, but there was a softness in her expression that caught me off guard. "No, I just thought it might be nice." Something about the way she said it, quiet, almost hesitant, made my throat tighten. I nodded, pushing my chair back. "That sounds perfect. Let's make it happen." That evening, we went to a little diner on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had the best burgers in Millhaven, and Caleb was thrilled at the chance to order a milkshake the size of his head. As we sat in the booth, laughing at Caleb's attempts to stack onion rings into a leaning tower, I realized how much I'd missed moments like this. For so long, I'd been so focused on holding everything together that I hadn't taken the time to enjoy the simple things. Ella caught me watching her and gave me a small smile. "What?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "I'm just proud of you guys. That's all." She rolled her eyes in that way only a teenager can, but I saw the corners of her mouth twitch upward. The days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. I focused on work, on the kids, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that Olivia had shattered. It wasn't always easy, but every small victory, every morning I woke up without the weight of her betrayal pressing on my chest, felt like progress. And then one evening I got an unexpected call. It was Olivia. I stared at the phone for a moment, debating whether to answer. A part of me wanted to let it ring, to send a clear message that I was done with her interruptions. But another part of me, the part that still sought closure, won out. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "What is it, Olivia?" There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she might have hung up. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. The words caught me off guard. "Thank me? For what?" "For everything," she said. "For being a good father to the kids. For keeping things together after I ruined everything." I didn't respond right away. Her words felt genuine, but they didn't erase the damage she'd done. "I don't need your thanks," I said finally. "I just want to move forward." "I understand," she said softly. "I won't bother you again. I just needed to say it." The line went quiet, and I sat there staring at the phone long after she hung up. That night, as I sat in the living room watching Caleb build yet another Lego masterpiece, I realized something. I was free. Not just from Olivia, but from the pain she'd left in her wake. It hadn't disappeared completely. It probably never would, but it no longer controlled me. I looked at Caleb, his face scrunched in concentration, and then at Ella, who was sprawled on the couch scrolling through her phone. They were my anchor now, my reason to keep going. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The following weekend, I took the kids to the lake. It was a place we hadn't visited since Olivia left, and I wasn't sure how they'd react. But as soon as we arrived, Caleb was off chasing frogs near the water, and Ella had her camera out, snapping photos of the autumn leaves. I stood on the shore, watching them, and felt a small smile tug at my lips. This was our new life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd imagined all those years ago when Olivia and I first started building our family. But it was ours, and for now, that was enough. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across the water, Ella walked over and stood beside me. "Thanks for bringing us here, Dad," she said, slipping her arm through mine. "Anytime, kiddo," I replied, my voice steady. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living,